I've talked a lot about prostitution in medieval London on my video on Bishop Pimps. However, I'd like to focus on some more recent events, I suppose, starting in 1668 with the Bawdy House Riot. Now, this is when staunch Protestants went around London and destroyed brothels. However, they did so in quite a well-organised manner. For instance, the historian Tim Harris said that they armed themselves with iron bars and even organised themselves into regiments. This wasn't the first anti-brothel riot in London. For instance, there were smaller ones in 1603 and 1642. But I'd like to highlight the Newgate Calendar. This began in the 18th century and was initially just a list of all the executions coming up that month, but it soon became quite a political publication. It would demonise prostitutes, drunks, and anyone that it deemed undesirable, while praising Protestants. Now, their very embellished stories about criminals would lay the foundation for the Penny Dreadfuls, which were cheap literature, essentially, that focused on Sweeney Todd, Dick Turpin, and the likes. But anyway, there was one institution that the Protestants, the Newgate Calendar, and everybody seemed to dislike, and that was the Molly House. Now, although there do seem to be prostitutes in some of these institutions, it was essentially just a place for adult men, consenting adult men, to meet up. So yes, it was for homosexuals. However, it's hard to know from the reports at the time as to what's fictitious, but it does seem that the men were free to meet up there, cross-dress, and do whatever the hell they like. One man who used to go to them was Charles Hitchin, and he was a renowned thief-taker and enemy of Jonathan Wild, who I mentioned in another video. Now, Jonathan Wild seems to be quite instrumental in spreading the misinformation about the Molly houses to get rid of his enemy, Charles Hitchin, and he accused them of dressing up like milkmaids and stuff like that, and also using female titles to address themselves. This misinformation led to the most famous Molly house being raided, and London's sort of gay subculture came to an end for a long time. However, what's interesting here is that the most famous Molly house was ran by a woman, Margaret Clapp. If you go back to the Bawdy House Riot, Samuel Pepys said at that time in London the most famous brothel owner was Damaris Page, another woman, and even Jonathan Wild helped train Elizabeth Atkins, who is better known as Moll King, and she ran the Tom King's Coffee House brothel. And Mother Needham worked in Tom King's Coffee House brothel, and she would go on to own her own brothel. So women often owned a lot of the brothels in London, much to the dislike of the Society for the Reformation of Manners. But while I'm on the subject, I think I should mention a few more female criminals and gangs. For instance, in the 17th century, there was Mary Frith, who was said to dress like a man, smoke a pipe, and even performed on stage. But she was a famous pickpocket and traded in stolen goods. And in the 20th century, there were the 40 Elephants. Now, this was a gang of women from Elephant and Castle, hence the name, that robbed high-end stores and had connections with the King of Britain's underworld at that time, Billy Hill. Now, they were said to have been very violent, drove fast cars, and had extremely wild parties in the interwar years in Britain.